William the Conqueror was one of the most formidable and ruthless rulers in medieval European history, and his mastery of continental warfare tactics, combined with strategic political maneuvering, made him the most successful foreign conqueror in English history. William's life was marked by extraordinary military genius, uncompromising political ambition, and an unwavering commitment to transforming Anglo-Saxon England into a Norman-dominated feudal kingdom. Originally ascending to power as the bastard Duke of Normandy around 1035 following his father's death, William's extraordinary military campaigns and diplomatic cunning would establish him as the dominant force across the English Channel. However, William's remarkable reign would ultimately be marked by both unprecedented territorial conquest and his violent death, which sent shockwaves throughout the entire kingdom. But how did this legendary warrior king meet his end during the height of his imperial power, and what do contemporary medieval sources reveal about his life and the circumstances surrounding his death? To answer these questions, we must explore the historical record and medieval accounts that document William's rise from bastard duke to supreme monarch of England. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel, Historical Exit. William the Conqueror was born around the year 1028 as the illegitimate son of Robert I of Normandy and Herleva of Falaise, with his bastard status creating immediate challenges for him from a young age, but also hardening his resolve to prove his worthiness through strength, determination, and cunning. The precise circumstances of William's birth would forever mark him as William the Bastard, a title that reflected both the shame and vulnerability of his illegitimate origins. And by the time of William's youth in the 1030s, medieval Normandy had become increasingly militarized, with rival nobles constantly challenging ducal authority, and these rebellions would systematically eliminate many of William's appointed guardians through assassination and treachery. The young duke's early years were marked by extraordinary violence and instability, as several of his guardians were murdered, including Gilbert of Brionne, who was killed around the year 1040, creating an atmosphere of constant danger and fear that would forge William's character, forcing him to learn that survival required both strategic thinking and ruthless action against his enemies. And it was during this period of intensifying rebellion by the Norman nobles that William would begin his remarkable consolidation of power, demonstrating spectacular military prowess when he decisively crushed the revolt at the Battle of Hastings in 1047, a victory that validated his legitimacy and established his reputation as a warrior of extraordinary capability. This pivotal battle occurred when William was only 19 years old and represented the culmination of a major rebellion led by Guy of Burgundy, with support from the Viscounts of Cotentin and Bessin, who had attempted to seize William at Valognes before he escaped under the cover of darkness to seek refuge with King Henry I of France. The Battle of Hastings marked a turning point in William's control of the duchy, though it was not the end of his struggle to gain the upper hand over the rebellious nobility, who would continue to challenge his authority for several more decades. After establishing his undisputed claim to the Dukedom of Normandy following years of brutal civil warfare, William's reputation as a formidable military commander would be further solidified by his successful campaigns against neighboring territories and his decisive role in supporting Henry I of France against rebellious vassals. The period from 1047 to 1054 saw almost continuous warfare, with lesser crises continuing until 1060, as William faced constant challenges from both internal rebellions and external invasions during these turbulent years. But the young duke's military prowess would be most dramatically demonstrated during the critical period of 1054 to 1057, when he faced a series of coordinated invasions designed to destroy his growing power and influence. In February 1054, King Henry I of France and the Norman rebels launched a devastating double invasion of the duchy, with Henry leading the main thrust through the county of Evreux, while the other wing, under the king's half-brother Odo, invaded eastern Normandy. William met this existential threat by dividing his forces into two complementing armies. the first of which he led personally, faced King Henry's main force, while the second army, which included future stalwarts like Robert, Count of Eu, Walter Giffard, and Roger of Mortimer, confronted the other invading force at the Battle of Mortimer, where they achieved a crushing victory that not only ended both invasions, but also allowed the Duke's supporters to depose the troublesome Archbishop Moger, who was a vocal advocate of King Henry and the Norman rebels. The Battle of Mortimer thus marked another crucial turning point in William's growing control of the duchy, and demonstrated his ability to coordinate multiple military operations simultaneously. However, his conflict with the French king and the Count of Anjou would continue until 1060, requiring William to maintain constant military readiness and tactical flexibility. In 1057, Henry and Geoffrey led yet another invasion of Normandy, but were decisively defeated by William at the Battle of Varaville, which proved to be the last invasion of Normandy during William's lifetime, and this established his complete dominance over his French rivals. However, not content to remain merely on the defensive though, William launched his own offensive operations in 1058, invading the Count of Dreux and capturing the strategic fortresses of Tillières-sur-Avray and Thamert, demonstrating his growing confidence and military capabilities. King Henry would attempt to disrupt William's conquests, especially the siege of Thamert, which dragged on for 2 years and would last until Henry's death in 1060, an event that fundamentally altered the balance of power in William's favor and eliminated his most dangerous continental rival. And the next major event in William's conquest would not occur till the year 1066, when William moved decisively to press his claim for the English throne, following the death of Edward the Confessor that same year. William's claim to the English throne derived from his familial relationship with Edward the Confessor's mother, Emma of Normandy, and he argued that this was a legitimate dynastic connection to the English crown. Contemporary Norman sources also claim that Edward the Confessor had promised William the succession during a visit to Normandy, though this claim remains disputed by modern historians who question whether Edward had the authority to make such a promise without the consent of the Witan. Additionally, William claimed that Harold Godwinson had sworn a sacred oath to support his claim to the throne, an event depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry and also described by Norman chroniclers, though again the exact circumstances and validity of this oath remain matters of historical debate and contention. However, the most remarkable aspect of William's preparation for the conquest of England was his success in obtaining a papal blessing for what was essentially an aggressive war of conquest, transforming a dynastic dispute into a holy war sanctioned by the church itself. Through careful diplomatic maneuvering and political manipulation, William managed to present his case to Pope Alexander II as a righteous campaign to restore legitimate authority and reform to the allegedly corrupt English church, thereby obtaining a papal banner that will legitimize his invasion in the eyes of medieval Christendom. This papal endorsement was crucial not only for moral legitimacy but also for practical reasons, as it helped William attract foreign volunteers and mercenaries who saw the expedition as a divinely sanctioned enterprise that promised both earthly rewards and spiritual benefits as well. The chronicler William of Jumex recorded that William thus assembled an immense army of Normans, men of Flanders, Franks and Bretons, demonstrating how the papal blessing helped him recruit a truly international force for his ambitious invasion of England. With his army and divine sanctions ready, William would embark on the most audacious military gamble of his career with his revolutionary invasion of England by building the largest invasion fleet Northern Europe had seen since the Viking Age. The scale of William's military preparations was unprecedented, requiring months of intensive organization and the construction of an entirely new fleet capable of transporting thousands of men and horses across the treacherous waters of the English Channel. Contemporary accounts vary wildly in their estimates of the size of William's force, with figures ranging from 7,000 to 15,000 men, though modern historians generally agree on a force of approximately 8 to 10,000 warriors supported by a fleet of between 600 to 1,000 ships. And William the Conqueror's strategic thinking would prove invaluable during the complex preparations for crossing the English Channel and confronting Harold Godwinson, who had seized the English throne despite William's claims of rightful succession. However, although the army and fleet were ready by early August, adverse winds kept the ships in Normandy until late September. Though there were probably some other strategic reasons for William's delay, including intelligence reports from England revealing that Harold's forces were deployed along the coast in anticipation of the invasion. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that William came with a great army from across the sea as God granted him because of the people's sins, reflecting the Norman interpretation that divine providence supported their conquest and demonstrating how effectively William's propaganda machine had worked to legitimize the invasion. And the actual crossing across the English Channel would occur during the night of September 28, 1066, when William's fleet finally sailed from St. Valery-sur-Somme under cover of darkness and landed at dawn on the beach of Pevensey on England's south coast. This timing proved fortuitous, as Harold Godwinson was fully occupied with another invasion in the north where the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada had landed with his own claim to the English throne, forcing Harold to divide his attention between two simultaneous threats to his kingdom. And by the autumn of 1066, William was positioned to complete the conquest that would establish Norman dominance over all of England if he could just manage to defeat Harold Godwinson, a fierce and intelligent military commander in his own right. And the climactic Battle of Hastings would begin on the morning of October 14, 1066, when William divided his forces into three coordinated groups: the Bretons on the left flank, the Normans in the center, and the French and the Flemish contingents on the right. William of Poitiers records that William placed foot soldiers armed with arrows and crossbows in the lead, foot soldiers in the second position but safer and equipped with hauberks, and in the rear were the squadrons of cavalry, and he took his place in the midst of them with the elite. From there he was able to direct from all sides using both voice and gestures. And Harold's forces had taken up defensive positions on the high ground of Senlac Hill, where the elevated terrain allowed them to harass any soldiers attempting to climb the slope by throwing missiles and engaging in devastating hand-to-hand combat that initially favored the English defenders. However, though, William was determined to claim the English crown, and contemporary accounts describe his leadership skills being brought to the forefront during the crucial moment when Norman morale wavered and rumors spread that the Duke himself had been killed in the fighting. But William rode to the front of his army, lifted his helmet to show his face, and began to shout, "Look at me, I live, and with God's help I shall conquer." This prevented panic from ensuing through the ranks and would encourage the Norman forces to attack Harold's fortified position again with great fervor and ferocity. But the Normans continued to struggle to dislodge Harold's soldiers from their hilltop position, and they suffered severe losses, making the battle begin to turn in the Anglo-Saxons' favor, causing some Norman troops to retreat towards the sea in apparent defeat. And the turning point in the Battle of Hastings would come when the retreating Normans were pursued by English soldiers who finally left their strong defensive positions on the hilltop, allowing William's cavalry to strike back with devastating effect and seize control of the battlefield. And during this chaotic cavalry strike, the death of King Harold would occur, whether from an arrow to the eye as depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry or from wounds inflicted by Norman knights remains unclear even to this day. But his death marked the effective end of the Battle of Hastings, with William the Conqueror arising as the victor of this great battle. And contemporary sources describe the aftermath of the battle as a complete catastrophe for the English, with the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recording that King Harold was killed and many good men with him that day, effectively decapitating the English leadership and leaving the kingdom defenseless against Norman occupation. Following the battle, William did not immediately march on London, but instead adopted a methodical strategy of intimidation and submission designed to break English morale and demonstrate the futility of resistance against his overwhelming military force. The Norman army moved in a wide arc around London, burning villages and towns in Kent, Surrey and Hertfordshire to demonstrate William's power, while avoiding direct assault on the heavily fortified capital until English resistance had been completely broken. This form of psychological warfare proved effective as English nobles began submitting to William individually rather than organizing coordinated resistance to the invasion. Edgar the Atheling, who had been proclaimed king by the surviving English nobles after Harold's death, found his support evaporating as earls and bishops sought accommodation with the Norman conqueror rather than facing the devastating consequences of continued resistance. The Archbishop of Canterbury, along with Edgar himself and the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, eventually submitted to William at Berkhamsted, effectively ending any organized English opposition to Norman rule and clearing the path for William's coronation. And with England now under his absolute control as William I, this newly enthroned King of England would now be faced with the monumental challenge of governing a hostile population. And the early years of William's reign were marked by constant rebellions and uprisings, as the English population struggled to accept foreign domination and the complete transformation of their society. In 1068, rebellions flared up in the southwest where the people of Exeter defied William's authority until he personally besieged the city and forced its submission through a combination of military pressure and negotiated settlements. However, though, the most serious challenge to Norman rule would come in 1069, when a major Danish invasion fleet arrived in England to support widespread English rebellions, forcing William to conduct multiple simultaneous military campaigns to suppress the uprising and eliminate the foreign threat to his kingdom. With the threat of these new Danish invaders becoming more increasingly worrisome, William would embark on his most notorious and ruthless period of systematic oppression and devastation, during the period remembered to history today as the Harrowing of the North, which lasted from 1069 to 1070. And this was a brutal campaign of destruction that shocked even his Norman supporters and demonstrated the lengths to which William would go to maintain his authority. When the English of Yorkshire rebelled in alliance with Danish invaders, William's response was swift and merciless. He advanced into Northumbria, defeated attempts to block his progress at Pontefract, occupied York, and then during the winter of 1069 he devastated the entire region in what contemporary chroniclers described as an act of unprecedented cruelty. After the ruthless harrowing of the North, William would be able to solidify his control, with the North serving as a stark warning to the rest of England of the deadly and brutal consequences of rebelling against the Norman forces. And with peace now finally established in England, William's governance would now look towards administrative reforms and legislations, including the comprehensive survey recorded in the Domesday Book, which the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes as an investigation so narrowly conducted that there was no single hide nor yard of land, nor indeed one ox, cow, or pig which was left out. This unprecedented survey, completed in 1086, represented the most comprehensive administrative achievement of the medieval period, and it demonstrated William's determination to extract maximum revenue from his conquered kingdom, while maintaining absolute control over every aspect of English society. His reign also saw the introduction of continental feudalism, the replacement of Anglo-Saxon nobles with Norman colonists, and the construction of massive stone castles that would serve as strategic bases for controlling the countryside. However, even the reign of the most successful and gifted medieval conqueror could not last forever, and on September 9th, 1087, at approximately dawn, King William I died at the priory of St. Gervais in Rouen, bringing to an end the most transformative reign in English medieval history. The exact circumstances surrounding the death of the conqueror reflect the violent nature of his life and times, with the chronicler Orderic Vitalis providing detailed accounts of his final campaign and the fatal injury that would claim the life of William the Conqueror. Traditional sources indicate that William had been conducting a punitive raid against the French Vexin when his horse stumbled during the sacking of Mantes, causing the iron pommel of his saddle to rupture his intestines, an injury that would prove mortal despite the best efforts of his court physicians and healers. It is believed the severity of this wound had occurred because William had grown increasingly overweight in his later years, a physical transformation that may have contributed to the severity of his final injury when he was thrown against his saddle pommel with such force that it caused fatal internal bleeding. William endured 6 weeks of excruciating agony before his death, during which time he experienced what appears to have been a profound spiritual crisis and a change of heart about the brutal methods he had used to maintain his power. Contemporary sources describe how William, although in great agony and pain, spent his final weeks reportedly distributing vast sums to the poor and churches, while contemplating the brutal methods and tactics he had utilized to bring Norman domination across England. And following William's death, the immediate aftermath revealed the precarious nature of medieval royal succession and the fear that the conqueror had inspired even in his own followers and servants. The chronicler William of Malmesbury records that when the king died, those who were near fled away. His servants, observing that their master was dead, laid hands on the arms, vessels, clothes, linen, and all the royal furniture, and left the corpse almost naked on the floor of the house. This quote demonstrates just how quickly loyalty evaporated when no longer backed by the threat of royal power. However, though, the king's body was eventually transported to Cayenne for burial at the Abbey of Saint Etienne, which William had founded. But even his funeral was marked by controversy and discord, as a local citizen named Asselin claimed that the burial grounds belonged to his family and demanded 60 shillings compensation before allowing the interment to proceed. This final indignity was compounded by reports that William's bloated corpse actually burst during the funeral ceremony, filling the church with such a horrible stench that mourners fled in disgust, creating a grotesque end to the life of a king who had terrorized 2 kingdoms through military conquest and systematic oppression. The story of William's exploding corpse, though, is still highly controversial, and many historians believe it could have been an exaggeration or an addition created by hostile chroniclers who still felt much disdain towards Norman royalty. But with this troubled burial finally completed, the extraordinary life of the man who had spent 21 years conquering and ruling England would come to an end amid scenes that reflected both the violence and instability of medieval politics. William's death at age 59 marked the conclusion of one of the most transformative periods in English history, as his conquest had permanently altered the linguistic, cultural, architectural, and political landscape of Britain in ways that would endure for centuries. His legacy extends far beyond military conquest and encompasses revolutionary concepts such as centralized administration, comprehensive land surveying, legal reform, and the establishment of Norman dominance that would define England for the next 300 years. So I hope you found this video on the life and death of William the Conqueror to be interesting and fascinating, and if you did enjoy it, please do like and share this video with others, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel Historical Exits so you can find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.